Hey guys, tonight we journey into the smoky mists of ancient prophecy. You're climbing the jagged path toward the sacred site of Delphi, where the air tastes faintly of ash and minerals, and the pine trees whisper secrets in the wind. The sun is sinking low behind Mount Parnassus, casting long shadows over the crumbling columns. You don't know it yet, but something deep in the earth is stirring something holy, or maybe just hazardous. Either way, you probably won't survive this if you're not a fan of strong smells and stranger riddles. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the time down in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step off the rough-hewn path, your sandals crunching on white gravel, and find yourself in front of the once glorious sanctuary of Apollo. The stones under your feet have been worn smooth by centuries of pilgrims, kings, generals, and nervous peasants seeking answers that would shape the fate of empires. You pause, staring up at the gleaming marble that somehow still glows golden in the late light. But you're not here for a tour. You're here to understand why. Eventually, the voice of the gods went quiet. The story starts not with the fall, but with the rise. Delphi wasn't always sacred. Long before the temple, there was just a cave, a fissure in the earth, where gases hissed up from the underworld. According to one myth, it was Gaia, the earth goddess, who first claimed this spot, whispering truth through a serpent-like creature named Python. Then came Apollo, youthful and a bit dramatic, who allegedly slew Python and claimed the site for himself. And just like that, your average mountainside crevice became the navel of the world. You make your way toward the Omphalos, yes, that's literally Greek for navel, a rounded stone that marks the center of the universe. According to ancient belief, it's smaller than you expected, maybe the size of a beach ball, but the weight of centuries makes it feel heavier somehow. You reach out to touch it. It's cold, unexpectedly smooth, and as your fingers rest on its surface, you almost feel the thrum of old rituals pulsing beneath the stone. The Oracle of Delphi was no minor village medium. She was the Pythia, the high priestess of Apollo, and her words could alter battle plans, shape colonies, and even dethrone kings. Once a month, during Apollo's sacred day, she would descend into the Adyton, the innermost chamber of the temple, and sit on a three-legged stool above the sacred chasm. Inhaling the mysterious vapors, she'd fall into a trance and speak words that others scrambled to interpret. Mainstream historians generally agree the Delphic oracle rose to prominence around the 8th century BCE, becoming a centerpiece of religious and political life. But there's a strange and more fringe theory that early visitors were drawn not by divine visions, but by the effects of ethylene gas leaking from beneath the temple, a mildly hallucinogenic substance that could make anyone sound, well, inspired. You continue up the sacred way, that winding path through the sanctuary complex. Your steps echo between columns and the bones of fallen statues. You can almost hear the murmur of pilgrims from 100 lands, all speaking different tongues but hoping for the same thing: clarity. But Delphi wasn't a free-for-all. You couldn't just walk in and ask if your crush liked you back. There were strict rituals, donations read bribes, and queues that stretched for days. And not everyone got an answer. The priests would screen your question, sometimes rewrite it, and then interpret the Pythia's mutterings for you. At this point, you're starting to wonder how much of the oracle's power came from Apollo and how much came from ancient stagecraft. You pause in front of the remains of the Temple of Apollo itself. Thick, weather-worn columns reach up toward the fading sky. The wind picks up, and it sounds like a sigh, a whisper too low to catch. The view is staggering. Below, the valley sprawls in lush greens and coppery shadows. You can see why Apollo chose this place, or maybe why humans chose to say he did. Emotion begins to swell in your chest, not because of some mystic revelation, but because you're standing in a place where people once traveled for weeks, with only hope in their packs. To hear a single sentence that might shape the rest of their lives. There's something deeply human about that, our need to believe in meaning, in signs, in something greater than the chaos of chance. And as the stars begin to peek through the indigo sky, you can't help but wonder what happens when that voice stops speaking. Historians still argue whether the oracle's silence began with political shifts, natural disasters, or simply a loss of faith. Some say the sacred gases dried up after a local earthquake. Others believe rising skepticism, especially from philosophical circles, began to erode trust in oracular authority. Maybe it wasn't Apollo who left but us, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, you're still in the golden age of Delphi, where gods walked in sandals and oracles spoke in riddles. You've reached the outer steps of the temple. The moon has risen, bathing the ruins in silver. You lean against the cold stone, eyes closed, letting the past seep in through your skin. Inside, something stirs, a flicker of memory, a breath of sulfur, a rustle of ancient robes. Tomorrow, you'll step into the sanctuary itself. But for now, let the mountain hold you in its stony silence. You wake with a faint ache in your legs, too much clambering up sacred hills, maybe, or just the weight of ancient mystery pressing on your calves. The morning air is sharp and clean, and the blue sky over Mount Parnassus is obnoxiously perfect. Not a cloud in sight. A good omen, if you believe in that kind of thing. Today, you step inside. The Temple of Apollo looms above you, its marble pillars still defiant against time. You brush your fingers along one, its surface cool and pitted, like a relic trying to remember its past. You slip past the threshold, and suddenly the light changes outside. Glare softens into the cool, flickering dimness of oil lamps. This is where the magic happened, or the hallucination, maybe both. You walk carefully along the edge of the Adyton, the inner sanctum, now a yawning depression in the stone floor. Once, it was the heart of divine communication. The Pythia would sit just above that spot, on her tripod, a bronze stool balanced above a crack in the earth, and wait for the vapors to take her. You lean in and sniff. But sorry, no prophetic gas left for tourists. Mainstream archaeology now supports the idea that fissures beneath the temple released ethylene, a sweet-smelling gas that can trigger euphoria and altered states of consciousness. That's right. Ancient Greece may have been running the world's most influential hotbox. Not that the Pythia was getting high for fun. This was sacred business. She'd enter a trance, speak in strange, fragmented phrases, and the priests would lean in, nod solemnly, and translate her babble into verse. But here's the thing, you're not sure who's in charge here. Is it the Pythia, the priests, or Apollo himself? Because frankly, this whole setup feels suspiciously like a divinely sanctioned game of telephone. You close your eyes and try to imagine it. The warm press of 100 pilgrims in the outer courtyard. The mingling aromas of sweat, incense, and something metallic, perhaps blood, from a recent animal sacrifice. The soft hiss of vapors rising from the chasm. Then the murmurs hush. A bell chimes. The Pythia emerges. She isn't a glamorous figure, not a gorgon-eyed witch in golden robes. She's often a middle-aged woman, chosen from the local population, trained in temple rites, sworn to celibacy. You hear her bare feet slap softly against the stone as she descends. Her face is unreadable. Is she scared? Excited, bored. You find yourself hoping she's okay. She sits, inhales, a moment of silence, and then it begins. A tremor in her limbs, a low hum, then stammered words, disjointed at first, like broken puzzle pieces flee. Iron, gift of fire, but never return. She isn't speaking to you, not really. She's channeling something. Maybe it's Apollo. Maybe it's the collective psyche of a nation that desperately wants answers. Either way, what she says next will be polished and packaged by the temple priests, who conveniently happen to have a lot of power. Fringe theorists argue this whole act was theater. The Pythia might have been coached, even manipulated. Some suggest the priests gathered intelligence from visiting petitioners beforehand, piecing together clever prophecies tailored to sound mystical while subtly steering political outcomes. Like a divine magic 8-ball rigged, you walk along the edge of the Adyton, your footsteps echoing like soft drum beats. At the far end is a stone basin once filled with laurel water, sacred to Apollo. The Pythia would wash here before each session, purifying herself. You dip your fingers into the dry bowl. Nothing but dust now, but you swear the stone smells faintly of herbs. And then, something odd, emotional, even. You imagine being her, sitting for hours in that haze, swaying slightly, your body not quite your own. People asking if they should wage war, whether their child will survive the year, if the gods are angry with them. Heavy stuff, no bathroom breaks. One day, she hears a voice ask, "Should I cross the river into Lydia?" And the words rise in her throat, like bile. If you do, a great empire will fall. She doesn't know it yet, but it will be the asker's own empire, not his enemies. Oops. Historians still argue whether the Pythia was aware of her influence, or if she genuinely believed herself a mouthpiece for the divine. Some records suggest she didn't even remember her trances. Others claim she went home at night and tended her garden like nothing had happened. You lean against one of the inner pillars and imagine the crowd outside: merchants, mothers, generals, and grifters, all waiting. Some come away changed, others furious. Some scribble down their prophecies and spend the next year trying to decode them like cryptic crossword puzzles. But the strange thing, people trust her. For centuries, they keep coming, Delphi becomes more than a sanctuary. It's a center of gravity, a place where human anxiety and cosmic indifference meet over a cup of laurel tea and try to make small talk. And now, you notice the walls, faint carvings, still cling to the stone snippets of poems, names, dedications. There's even a famous maxim, know thyself, classic Greek advice, slightly annoying, yet irritatingly profound. Outside, the sun is high now. The temple glows, white and gold. You step back through the columns and turn to look at the entrance one last time. The doorway feels like a threshold between worlds on one side, logic and daylight on the other, whispers, gas, and prophecy. Before you leave, you catch the glint of something metallic in the ground. You kneel and brush away the dirt. It's just a coin, maybe a drachma left as an offering, but for a second, you swear it's warm. You drop it in your pocket. No sense in angering Apollo. You start down the steps, and just as your foot touches the first one, you hear a voice behind you, soft, barely a breath. Beware the flame that follows iron. You spin around. The temple is empty. The air still. Probably just your imagination. Probably you're walking downhill now, away from the silent marble columns and lingering shadows of Apollo's temple. But your mind is still upstairs, perched on that tripod, inhaling fumes, murmuring riddles to an audience of trembling mortals. You can't help it. The Pythia's voice sticks with you, like a melody you only half remember. The thing is, her voice didn't just reach villagers in olive groves or poets with ink-stained robes. No kings came calling. Whole empires rearranged their furniture based on her muttered syllables. And somehow, despite giving answers like, "You will destroy a great empire," people kept trusting her, even when it was their empire she meant. Let's rewind a bit to the age of oracles and empires. You're standing in line at Delphi behind a man draped in royal purple, a gold circlet glinting on his brow. That's Croesus, king of Lydia, fabulously wealthy and slightly full of himself. He's just asked the oracle if he should attack Persia. The Pythia, doing her usual thing, declares, "If you cross the river Halys, you will destroy a great empire." You can almost see Croesus grin. What a green light. Right, wrong. He crosses the river, picks a fight with Cyrus the Great, and his empire gets flattened like a poorly folded toga. Historians still debate whether the prophecy was a clever dodge or a lucky accident. Either way, Croesus ends up defeated and probably regretting that particular road trip. But he's not the only one who misreads the Pythia. Flash forward a century. You're now shoulder to shoulder with Themistocles, the cunning Athenian general. Persia's back, and this time they're coming hard. Athens is panicking, so they send Themistocles to Delphi for some divine reassurance. He asks the Pythia what to do. She answers, more or less flee to the ends of the earth. Not super helpful, but then she adds something cryptic about a wooden wall saving Athens. Themistocles decides she means boats, clearly a leap of logic, or perhaps an act of desperate optimism. He convinces the Athenians to invest in their navy. They defeat the Persians at Salamis, and boom, Delphi gets another win on the board, probably by accident, possibly divine intervention, or maybe Themistocles just had great PR. You pass by the remains of the ancient treasuries, small, ornate buildings that city-states built to store offerings and show off their wealth. The Athenians had one, and after Salamis, they filled it with spoils of war, a giant golden tripod, some enemy weapons, the usual celebratory trophies. It's like leaving your bowling shoes at the altar because you just beat Persia. Casual. But the oracle didn't always side with the Greeks. Enter Nero. Yes, that Nero, the Roman emperor, with a flair for fire and fiddles. He visits Delphi in the 1st century CE, demanding a prophecy. The Pythia tells him, "Flatly your presence here outrages the god." Brave woman, Nero responds by taking 500 of Delphi's best statues back to Rome and possibly executing a few priests. Not the ideal Yelp review. Still, even in its decline, the oracle's brand remained strong. Pilgrims kept coming, hoping for clarity, insight, maybe even comfort. But let's be honest, what they got was rarely that simple. The Pythia's prophecies were notoriously ambiguous. You will go, you will return, not die in war, depending on where you place the commas, could mean entirely opposite things. Ancient grammar, your fate may depend on it. This deliberate vagueness gave the oracle a built-in escape hatch. Whatever happened, you could squint and say, "Yep, that's what she meant." Modern scholars still wrestle with this. Was the ambiguity intentional? A safeguard against angry kings with sharp swords? Or just the result of translating drug-fueled monologues through 3 layers of interpretation and poetry? You sit now on a warm stone bench beside the sacred way, watching golden light dance through cypress trees. It's quiet, except for the occasional bird call and the far-off bleating of goats. And you wonder, if you were in charge of an empire, would you really stake it on the word of a woman half-conscious in a cave? Apparently, yes. But here's the human side. Those rulers weren't just greedy for power. They were scared, isolated, in moments of crisis. Even emperors want someone wiser to lean on. And in that way, the oracle was less about predicting the future and more about justifying choices. The god said so always sounds better than I panicked and guessed. You brush some pebbles off your robe and walk over to a low stone wall. The view opens up again, dizzying in its expanse. From here, you can almost see the crossroads of history, where oracles nudge the trajectory of civilizations with words that might have been divine, or might have just been ambiguous enough to fit any outcome. And then there's the weird stuff. One account mentions a prophecy given to a Spartan envoy that said, "You will conquer if you don't." That's not helpful. It's just infuriating. Another tale claims the Pythia once predicted the rise of a one-eyed ruler from the west. Some say that was Alexander the Great. Others argue she was talking about a completely different guy with a squint. You step back toward the temple, dust on your sandals, the wind pulling softly at your tunic. The light is starting to fade again, and the stones cast long, melancholic shadows. You reach into your pocket and feel the cool metal of that coin from yesterday, still warm. And now a thought occurs to you. What if the oracle wasn't meant to give answers, but to make you ask better questions? You stop, just for a moment, and turn to look at the temple once more. High above, in the rafters where birds now nest, you imagine voices whispering, not gods, not ghosts, just echoes of indecision turned into poetry. You take one last step toward the exit, but something inside you hesitates. Not fear, just curiosity, because the Pythia didn't always speak. Sometimes she refused to answer. Silence itself, used as a weapon, and tomorrow you'll find out who made her quiet. You descend from the heights of Delphi, each step a little heavier than the last. The temples, the murmurs, the riddles, they linger like a fine mist in your mind. But somewhere between olive trees and ancient echoes, a question hangs stubbornly in the air. Why did she stop speaking? The Oracle of Delphi, who once whispered fate to kings and commoners alike, eventually fell silent. No more cryptic verses, no more smoke and tremble, just silence. And for something that was once the pulsing heart of Greek religious life, that silence is deafening. So, what happened to answer that? You travel forward past the glories of Periclean Athens, beyond Alexander's conquests, into the brittle shadow of the Roman Empire. Delphi survives, barely, adapting as each new conqueror drapes it in a different cloak. But the voice, the divine whisper through the Pythia, it grows quieter. The first cracks appear not in the temple's marble, but in its authority. You find yourself in the 2nd century BCE. Rome, now ascendant, looks eastward. The Greek world, once proud and chaotic, becomes a Roman province, elegantly conquered. At first, the Romans are respectful enough. They even consult the oracle now and then. But the relationship feels transactional, less reverence, more tourism. A Roman general tosses a coin. Should we attack, he asks. The Pythia responds. He nods, thanks her, and heads back to his camp with all the spiritual sincerity of someone checking their horoscope in the back of a newspaper. You can feel it, the beginning of the end. But it's not just politics that threaten Delphi's glow. Nature joins the revolt. Historians still argue whether a series of earthquakes in the 1st century BCE damaged the sacred fissures that once emitted those ethereal vapors. If you believe the geologists, the gas was key. No fumes, no trance, no prophecy. It's as if Apollo's microphone got unplugged. You kneel beside the stone floor where the Pythia once sat, and press your palm flat, cold, still, no hum beneath the surface, no scent of something ancient trying to break free, just a dead channel, like tuning a radio and finding nothing but static. The priests, of course, try to adapt. They play up tradition, lean harder on riddles, but the magic is fading. Visitors notice. She doesn't speak like she used to. One says, too vague, complains another. A few even whisper that the gods have left. You walk now along the remnants of the sacred way, winding past crumbling treasuries and offerings choked by weeds. The road is quieter, less foot traffic. You hear the flap of a bird's wings echo through the ruins, and something else, a strange loneliness, like the sanctuary itself, knows it's being forgotten. Then, a different sound entirely, footsteps. Yours. You're not alone in wondering what killed the oracle. Some blame it on Rome's shifting priorities, emperors who preferred spectacle to subtlety. Why whisper in riddles when you can dazzle with lions and gladiators? Others think the cult of Apollo simply aged out, replaced by newer, shinier ideas. People got tired of decoding verse and started asking for clarity instead of mystery. But then comes the real game changer. You arrive in the 4th century CE, where the air feels heavier not from gases, but from change. Constantine has legalized Christianity, and the new faith is rising fast. It doesn't want competition, oracles pagan nonsense, sacrifices outdated rituals, gods of sun and stone idols, to be smashed. You watch as edicts begin to roll out. Theodosius. Name's familiar. Right. He bans pagan worship altogether. Delphi is now illegal. The temples close. The Pythia is told to go home. You picture her, the last one. Maybe she's young. Maybe she waited for Apollo to speak, even after the priest left and the candles died. But no god came. No tremor shook her bones. The fissure stayed dry. One morning, she simply stood up, folded her robes, and walked out into the sun. You follow her path through the olive trees. You imagine her trading her laurel crown for a basket of figs, speaking only to neighbors now, not kings. She's not a prophet anymore, just a woman with memories too strange to share. There's one last whisper in the scroll of history, a line from the 4th century philosopher and poet, Plutarch. He served as a priest at Delphi, wrote about the oracle's power and mystery, but even he noted a change. The gods, he said, were retreating. Historians still argue whether Delphi's decline was natural, political, or spiritual. Maybe all three, maybe none. Maybe Apollo just got tired. You pass the spot where his statue once stood sun god, lyre in hand, muscles gleaming in golden light. Now only a broken plinth remains, and a small weed growing through the cracks. But don't despair. Something strange lingers here. Maybe not prophecy, maybe not power, but memory. Even now, as the wind picks up and the air cools, you feel watched, not in a scary way, in a curious, echoing way, as if the mountain itself is wondering what you'll do with the story. You stand at the edge of Delphi's theater, the seats overgrown, but the view still breathtaking. You sit, alone but not lonely, and think, what if prophecy isn't about knowing the future, but about being brave enough to face it? From this height, the silence makes sense. It's not absence, it's transition, a voice that served its time and then stepped aside. But tonight, as the sun begins to sink behind the hills and the shadows reach long and slow across the stones, you feel the hush again, not empty, full of something old, waiting quietly beneath your thoughts. Night has fallen gently over Delphi now. You're still seated in the ancient theater, stone cooling beneath you, a breeze stirring the trees behind the stage. The stars above are clear and unbothered, the kind of sky that makes you feel both tiny and utterly connected. It's quiet here, but not empty. The silence hums as you rise and begin walking again, your steps tracing the winding paths pilgrims once climbed. Another thought tugs at your sleeve. What did the people do when the oracle stopped speaking? You'd think the end of a centuries-old spiritual hotline would spark panic, mass existential crises. But the reality was slower. Stranger, they didn't riot or grieve. They shifted quietly, as if waking up from a long, strange dream. You descend through time again, early 5th century CE, and find Delphi crumbling more from indifference than assault. The priests try to hold services without prophecies, kind of like a karaoke night where nobody wants to sing. Pilgrims stop coming. The offerings dry up. Even the sacred laurel trees begin to wilt from neglect. But not everyone gives up so easily. You pass by a low stone hut near the sanctuary's edge, where an old woman in tattered robes is burning herbs. She's no Pythia, but she says the god still speaks to her. Her clients are desperate farmers, worried about the harvest, mothers asking about fevers. Even without Apollo, the human need for hope doesn't just vanish. And that's the thing. The oracle was never just about Apollo. It was about people's need to believe there's someone bigger than themselves offering guidance. Take away the smoke and the chanting and the poetic riddles, and you're still left with people asking the same questions. Am I safe? Will my children thrive? Is this the right path? As Christianity rises, it steps into that vacuum. You now find yourself inside a small, candlelit chapel built from repurposed Delphi stones. That chunk of marble in the corner probably used to be part of Apollo's altar. The bishop speaks gently. The icons glow. There's incense, too, but now it's frankincense, not mysterious, earthborn vapors. You hear prayers in a new cadence, less riddle, more rhythm, yet the overlap is striking. Saints replace gods, miracles replace prophecy. Instead of the Pythia, there are now hermits and mystics who speak with divine authority. One monk near Delphi reportedly fasted until visions came. Sound familiar? Historians still argue whether Christianity absorbed elements of the oracle, or if it simply evolved from the same root, our shared hunger for the numinous. Either way, Delphi's silence wasn't a full stop. It was a handoff. Still, not everyone lets go so easily. You visit a Roman noble's library, scrolls carefully organized, the air thick with dust and debate. He's studying the old prophecies, convinced that they hold secret truths about the Christian apocalypse. The oracle, in his mind, didn't vanish. She just changed frequencies. This belief sticks around. Actually, centuries later, some medieval scholars claim that Delphi's last words were about the coming of a new god, one nailed to a cross. Of course, there's no evidence, but belief. Oh, belief doesn't care about evidence. It cares about longing. And Delphi continues to linger, even after the stones fall, after the village of Castri is built on top of the ruins, after the exact location of the temple is forgotten. People still tell stories. Farmers avoid a certain rocky outcrop because the air smells strange there. A shepherd hears whispers in the wind. A child won't go near the spring, claiming a lady in white lives there and asks impossible questions. You walk beneath Castri's humble homes now, imagining what it must have felt like to live above a ghost. Every time someone digs a well or builds a wall, they find marble, columns, statues with their faces worn off, Apollo trying to rise again. Then, finally, in the 19th century, archaeology crashes the party. You stand next to a French archaeologist with dirt on his sleeves and awe in his eyes. The village is relocated. The ruins are unearthed. The theater, the treasuries, the temple of Apollo all exhumed like bones of a sleeping giant. For the first time in centuries, the world remembers Delphi not as myth, but as fact. And yet, The oracle doesn't return. You'd think maybe, with all the rebuilding, the god might stir again. But no, the fissure stays dry. No Pythia steps forward. The tripod remains empty. The questions don't stop, though they just get louder. Because now modern minds are asking what really happened. Was it hallucination? Was it gas? Was it genius wrapped in mysticism? You lean over a diagram one archaeologist has drawn fault lines running under the temple, marked in red. Ethylene gas, maybe, enough to cause altered states, enough to stir a trance. But there's no certainty. The science is fuzzy. The poetry is stubborn. A soft wind lifts a bit of dirt near your feet, revealing a single broken tile. You pick it up. It's cool to the touch, surprisingly smooth. It probably once framed a mosaic, perhaps of Apollo himself. Now, it's just a whisper, and you feel it again, that haunting awe. Delphi may be silent, but it is not still. Something watches, waits, maybe not for questions, but for someone brave enough to sit in silence and listen. You make your way to the edge of the site, where the view is uninterrupted, the valley yawning out beneath you like an open palm. The night is thick with stars, and for a fleeting moment, you think you hear something. Not a voice, not words, just the space where words used to live. And as you turn to leave, that moment hangs in your chest like an unfinished sentence, because the oracle didn't just vanish. She left an ellipsis. You descend the slope beneath Delphi with the hush of ancient voices still tickling the back of your neck. But you're not quite done, because for all the poetic endings and scientific theories, there's one last twist in the tale, maybe the oddest of them all. Turns out, the oracle didn't just vanish into myth and ruins. She got repackaged. Your next stop isn't Greece, it's Europe, centuries later, in a candlelit hall where dusty scholars in velvet robes debate the wisdom of the ancients. Renaissance thinkers, medieval bishops, Enlightenment skeptics. They all tug at Delphi like it's a particularly fascinating scab. And oddly enough, everyone seems to have an opinion on a woman who hasn't spoken in 1,000 years. You're now standing in a chilly 15th century study, quills scratching, Latin muttering. One scholar swears the oracle predicted the coming of Christ. Another argues she was just high on local geology. A third, probably sipping watered-down wine, announces that the whole thing was an elaborate con by priests with excellent stage presence. And you're just trying not to sneeze from the centuries-old dust. These intellectual tug-of-wars spark something peculiar, what you could call the oracle revival. It's not mystical, it's academic. Artists paint her, playwrights write about her, poets name drop her like she's some elusive celebrity. And historians, well, you've probably guessed they still argue whether the oracle's legacy was more spiritual or political. It's during this time that the oracle becomes a symbol, and you'll love this not of prophecy, but of reason. Seriously, you're in a 17th century salon now, sipping pretend tea with thinkers in powdered wigs. They talk about Delphi the way you might talk about NASA, as if it were a science lab rather than a sanctuary. The oracle becomes shorthand for ancient insight, the kind of wisdom we've supposedly outgrown but secretly still crave. One writer describes her as the whispering ghost of rational instinct. Another calls her the original philosopher, wrapped in incense and riddles. There's even a whole play where the Pythia appears as a time-traveling truth bomber. She rolls her eyes at court jesters, predicts the Enlightenment, then disappears in a puff of sarcasm. Okay, that last part might not be historical, but you get the vibe. But even as she morphs into this metaphorical queen of cool-headedness, there's still something unresolved, something nobody can quite wrap their quill around. Why did people believe her in the first place? Here's where it gets weird again. You're in a 19th century psychology lecture now. The oracle becomes a case study for the new science of the mind. One early psychologist claims she was just demonstrating collective archetypal resonance, which is fancy speak for people really want their feelings validated by someone in fancy robes. Another theory, mass hypnosis or early performance art. Or, my personal favorite, a state-sponsored anxiety sponge. Basically, life was terrifying, so society hired one woman to freak out on their behalf. Quirky? Sure, but emotionally kind of brilliant. Even more recent scholars jump in. Some claim the oracle functioned like a pre-modern therapist, giving vague but comforting advice while the priests handled crowd control. Others insist she was a political tool, a sacred mascot used to sway public opinion, boost morale, or justify a war with conveniently divine timing. Yet despite all the skepticism, all the science, the oracle refuses to become irrelevant. You stroll through a 21st century museum now. Behind glass, a three-legged tripod gleams under soft lights. A plaque reads, "Replica of the Delphic Oracle's seat." Visitors linger, eyes wide. Kids whisper. A teenager taps her phone, probably Googling how to become a prophet. And then you notice the souvenir shop. Pythia keychains, oracle-themed notebooks, scented candles labeled Delphic vapors, which, side note, probably not a great idea to inhale recreationally. It's kitschy, it's commercial, but it's also kind of perfect, because here, in this chaotic modern world of push notifications and algorithmic overload, the idea of a single, clear voice feels like magic again. And that brings you to the present. Your present. Look around. People still read horoscopes. They still consult tarot cards, psychics, Reddit threads, YouTube astrologers, even AI chatbots. Different platforms. Same hunger. Tell me what's going to happen. Tell me what I should do. So here's the real secret. The Oracle of Delphi never really died. She just changed costume. Maybe she's hiding in your playlist shuffle. Maybe she's the strange feeling you get before making a big decision. Maybe she's the voice you hear in your head when you finally sit still long enough to listen. Or maybe she's in your dreams tonight, perhaps, and somewhere buried under layers of time, marble, and mystery. The Pythia smiles. You turn now, looking back at the sanctuary one more time before heading into the misty woods. The stars twinkle hard above the peaks. You feel like they're winking at you, and just before the trail disappears behind you, you hear it again, not sound, but space, the shape of something unfinished, an idea not yet spoken. It's not a prophecy, it's an invitation, and the question now is, will you listen? You wake at dawn in a mountain clearing, mist curling around your ankles like a stray thought. Sleep didn't come easily, not with the scent of laurel still clinging to your jacket and that peculiar silence still echoing in your ears. But there's something about early morning in the Parnassian Heights, something that feels clean, ancient, and oddly weightless. You brush off the cold and start walking again. But where do you go when the path behind you was lined with gold offerings, speaking smoke, and gods, and the path ahead leads only deeper into the woods? You decide to follow the pilgrims, not the ancient ones this time, the modern ones. Because yes, people still come to Delphi, not for prophecy, maybe, but for something almost harder to define. You catch up with a tour group, backpacks and cameras jangling like armor. Their guide is cheerful, but a little too loud for this quiet place. Still, as they stop in front of the temple's skeletal remains, a hush falls over them. One woman presses her palm to the sun-warmed stone. A child closes their eyes like they expect to hear something, and maybe they do. Awe is slippery like that. It's not about what's said, it's about what might have been said. You trail the group for a bit longer. Listening in, one man whispers that his grandmother always swore Delphi had thin air, not in the oxygen sense, but in the spiritual one. Another mentions a podcast about ley lines and ancient energy centers. A third says nothing, but their eyes brim a little when they look out over the valley. That view, by the way, still devastating. And that's when it hits you Delphi still works. Not as an oracle, not as a hotline to Apollo, but as a mirror, a space to pour your own questions into and see what ripples back. Historians still argue whether ancient visitors actually believed the god spoke through the Pythia, or if they believed she was simply good at reflecting their deepest truths back to them. But standing here now, it's hard to imagine anyone leaving unchanged. You pause at the Castalian spring, cupping a little water in your hand, cold and clear, unremarkable and yet impossibly clean. Pilgrims once bathed here to purify themselves before entering the sanctuary. You splash your face and feel a flicker of understanding. Not about gods or gases or prophecy, but about ritual, the act of preparation, of opening yourself to meaning. And sometimes that's enough. Next, you head into town. Modern Delphi is tidy and sun-drenched, with souvenir shops, cafes, and a few too many faded postcards of marble torsos. But the energy is strange in a good way. It's a blend of reverence and tourism. Like everyone knows they're sitting on sacred ground, but they've also got dinner reservations at 7. You meet a cafe owner named Maria. She's stirring coffee and rolling her eyes at a customer trying to pay in drachmas. My grandmother said the oracle still walks. She tells you, at night, white dress, bare feet, only speaks to those who are ready. You ask if she believes it. She shrugs. I believe in good coffee and ghosts. Both get stronger with time. The museum is your last stop. Inside, behind climate-controlled glass, are the objects the oracle once breathed in: tripods, inscriptions, a golden laurel crown so finely made it looks like it would disintegrate under touch. There's also a small, cracked statue of Apollo. His face is mostly gone, but his stance is still confident, still waiting. And near the exit, a reconstructed hymn to the god himself, carved into marble with musical notations no one has sung in centuries. You put on the headphones, and for the first time on this journey, you don't just read Delphi. You hear her. The hymn is soft, haunting, composed by someone who genuinely believed they were honoring a living presence. The notes rise and fall like breath. like prayer, like memory. A chill dances down your spine. You leave the museum in a daze, the music echoing long after it stops. Outside, the sun's a little higher, the town's a little busier, but the oracle's still quiet, still gone, or maybe not, because that night, back in your hotel room, you dream you're in the temple again, alone this time. Smoke winds around your feet like a living thing. The tripod is warm, and across from you, in the shadows, someone watches, not threatening, not kind, just waiting. You try to speak, but your voice catches, and then you realize it's not your voice that matters. It's your question. You whisper it, and in the moment before waking, something stirs. Not an answer, but the sense of one coming. Morning light pours through your window like a silent drum roll. You blink once, twice, and for a strange, fleeting moment, you're not sure if you're still dreaming. The air carries a faint mineral tang, like laurel leaves crushed in a brass bowl, and the dream, that shadowed sanctuary, clings to your ribs like damp linen. You shake it off, sort of. Today is your last day in Delphi. Not just the place, but the story. The question that started this whole slow tumble through myth, politics, psychology, geology, and the flickering flame of human hope. Why did the oracle fall silent? You wander through town one final time. The shopkeepers are already sweeping the steps. The tourists haven't spilled in yet. It's just you and the mountains and the thin breeze that always seems to whisper without quite saying anything. There's a phrase that scholars sometimes throw around: the decline of Delphi was inevitable. You think about that. Sure, the geological vents may have dried up. The Roman emperors had less patience for mystics and more for gladiators. The world changed. Empires rose and fell. The questions people asked grew louder, more complex. Perhaps prophecy just couldn't keep up. Or maybe it was a choice. The last priestess, staring out from her perch, watching the world tilt toward war and empire and iron, might have simply decided to stop, to let the silence speak louder than riddles. Historians still argue whether the oracle's disappearance was due to environmental shifts, religious competition, or sheer cultural fatigue. Some point to the rise of Christianity, which branded pagan rituals as heresy. Others claim Roman engineers accidentally blocked the fault lines during renovations. A few insist the oracle predicted her own end, then vanished on cue. But standing here, heart beating in this still holy place, you wonder if it matters, because silence isn't always absence. Sometimes it's an answer. You make your way back to the ancient theater, climb to the top row, sit on the stone bench where countless others once watched the sacred plays of Dionysus, laughing or weeping, or maybe just waiting for something to make sense. And as the valley unfolds before you, golden and green and endlessly still, you feel the truth settle like dust in your chest. The oracle didn't die. She dispersed into the myths you read as a child, into the histories you skimmed in school, into the voices of those who dare ask hard questions in soft tones. She became a template, a blueprint for every moment when someone closed their eyes, inhaled deeply, and asked the world to whisper something back. And in that sense, she's everywhere. In the courtroom, when a lawyer pauses before the verdict, in the hospital hallway, when a parent waits for the doctor's face, in the classroom, when a child looks at a test and searches their gut for an answer, in the quiet kitchen at midnight, when you're trying to decide whether to stay or go. That's where the oracle lives now, not in smoke or stone, but in pause, in stillness, in the exquisite, breathless wait for clarity. And maybe that's why she stopped speaking, because eventually it was our turn to find the answers in ourselves. You rise, brushing dust from your hands. The breeze picks up, lifting a strand of your hair. Somewhere, a bird calls. Below, Delphi begins to stir again. Cafes open their doors. Laughter rises from a nearby square. The modern world, ever impatient, rolls on. But before you leave, one last look at the temple, the mountain, the echo of the voice that once shook nations. And then you smile, because some questions don't need answers. They just need asking. The sun lowers, casting long shadows across the slopes of Mount Parnassus. The marble stones cool beneath a lavender sky, and the day, like the oracle's voice, draws gently to a close. You let the silence stretch a little longer this time. Let the memory of olive leaves rustling and spring water trickling nestle behind your eyelids. Let your thoughts soften like worn linen. Sometimes, stories aren't about finding answers. Sometimes, they're about feeling your way through the fog, standing quietly in sacred places, listening, not with your ears, but with the tender, wondering part of your chest that still believes in something just beyond the veil. That's what Delphi gives you. Not certainty, but the permission to wonder. The reassurance that mystery is not a mistake, but a feature. That it's okay to pause, to breathe, to not know. As you lie back, wherever you are tonight, on your couch, in your bed, nestled under a blanket that smells faintly of last week's laundry, let that idea cradle you. That maybe, just maybe, you don't have to figure everything out right now. The oracle fell silent. Yes, but that silence still hums. And somewhere inside you, if you listen closely, you can still feel it. A soft pulse beneath the noise. A thread of ancient calm, winding its way through the present. Pull it gently. Let it lead you home. The story is over. See you tomorrow night. Sweet dreams.